You here? Okay, great. It's wonderful to be here, all the way from New Zealand. One thing just to get started, you realise that I'm running 2 workshops. There's tonight's one now, and then tomorrow there's another workshop at the same time. Now originally they were 1 2.5 hour workshop, which got chopped in half. So it's not the same workshop repeated, but they will both stand alone. So you can come to both, you can come to one, whatever. But yes, tomorrow nights will kind of continue on from where tonight finishes, wherever that might be. So I come from New Zealand, as Brian said. It took me 32 hours to get here. Imagine. This is the view from my house before I left. I live in Raglan on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand, tiny little place, 3,000 people. And this was I'd like to say a typical morning, but probably not. But it's midwinter at the moment. It was 0 degrees when I left. Oh, that's in centigrade. In Fahrenheit, 32 degrees when I left home. And now it's, 35 degrees here. So a bit of a temperature change, for me. The only thing Raglan is famous for is surf. There's a picture of the surf break relatively near my house. And if anyone here is a surfer, you'll notice instantly that that's a very unusual surf break because the surf is breaking from the left. Most surf in the world breaks from the right. And so apparently we have the best left-hand surf break in the world. Apparently. I don't know. And this is my family. I have 4 children. They're all pretty much grown up. I have a son who's 29, a son who's 26, another son who's 21, and a daughter who is 22, and my wife, whose age I won't mention. They've all had varying successes at school. Some have done better than others. But a while ago, early on this year, I had a birthday. And they all got together, pooled all their savings, and bought me a birthday card. And I want to share this birthday card with you because I think it makes a good point. So this is the birthday card from my kids. And on the front it says, "No, no, no, you're not old." And inside it says,
"Oh, you're not old. You're not that old. No, there's lots of things older than you. There's a ton of redwood trees, rocks, most of the planet. Did you say Napoleon?"
Did you hear that? You're not old. There's lots of things older than you. There's redwood trees, there's rocks. Most of the planets are older than you. So that was from my children. But the point is, I am actually really old. In fact, I'm so old that I can remember a time before television sets. In 1962, the first television set arrived in our street. An elderly woman down the road bought this 12-inch black and white television set, and my thrill for the week was being able to walk down to her house with my sister at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening to watch I Love Lucy. That was the thrill. You see, I belong to an amazing generation, I think. A generation that I call the how generation. As in, how do you work that thing? Because that's what we've had to do. You know, I can remember before television, the introduction of television, and now one of my sons has got like a 52-inch flat screen, 3-dimensional television with surround sound, the whole drama. I can remember before computers, no computers. And then we had big computers, and then we had smaller computers. And these days, something like this apparently has more computing power than it took to send Apollo 11 to the moon. Apparently. It's fascinating. You know, my generation has seen everything. Telephones. I can remember when a telephone was something that had a dial on it with holes in it, and you put your finger in a hole on the dial and turned the dial. To the ubiquity of cell phones, it did not exist. You know, everything, fax machines, obviously the internet. I can remember a time before the internet, and now the proliferation of the internet, which I think is probably one of the most amazing changes that's ever happened in the world. And it's what I call the how generation. And the thing about the how generation is that we have coped. We have managed. So it's big ups to anyone here who's over 50, because we're part of the how generation. And people have written about our generation, of course. How many of you have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers? Now, Outliers? You know that book? Some of you know that book. It's a wonderful book, isn't it? I hated it. And the reason is because he said a couple of things. I hated it for two reasons. Number one, he said that the greatest advantage that Bill Gates and Stephen Jobs had in being able to turn computers, the whole idea of computers, into a massive world-changing industry that made them huge personal fortunes. The most important thing, that the advantage they had that enabled them to capture computing as it was starting to grow and develop it and grow with it and do really well out of it, was that they were born in 1955. I was born in 1955, and I can remember the first computer I came across. It was when I was in university, about 1973, and it was about as big as half this room, this huge big box, and it had a kind of a blank face with a couple of dials on it, a couple of lights, and a hole in it that you had to put punch cards through. And I can remember you had to get a stack of something like 280 punch cards to do one simple multivariate analysis. And if there was one hole wrong in one punch card, the thing wouldn't work. I hated it, absolutely hated it. And I can remember promising that I would never have anything to do with computers until someone made them user-friendly. And of course, those two gentlemen did. Worked out well for them, as they say. And the other thing that Malcolm Gladwell's book talked about was that the biggest advantage that people like Michael Jordan and what's that famous hockey star from Canada, Wayne Gretzky. The biggest advantage that Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan had, and nearly 40% of the professional rugby league players in Australia, and nearly 50% of professional hockey players in Canada, and a huge percentage of the professional baseball players in the United States. The biggest advantage they had was they were born in January or February, because they were the oldest in their year group. They were the tallest, they were the most physically mature, they probably had the best reflexes, the best muscle development. So they got all the attention, they got picked for the teams, they got all the coaching, they got all the training, and they were able to turn physical attributes into vast personal fortunes. I was born in January 1955, and all I can really say is that I was always big for my age, really. But sports never did it for me, and computers never did it for me. But the other thing that Malcolm Gladwell talked about, which I thought was fascinating, was how long it takes to get good at anything. And he said that, according to the research he had done, that it takes 10,000 hours. Excuse me. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good golfer. It doesn't matter what your talent is. Obviously, talent makes a difference from where you start, but it's the 10,000 hours that really makes the difference. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good tennis player. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good poet. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good engineer. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good doctor, to be a good lawyer, to be a good teacher. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good teacher. Now, I've been a teacher for 27 years, so I think I'm getting good at it. But I don't teach every single day. But for a teacher who is teaching every single day, it takes about 10 years. If you're working kind of an 8 month of the year, teaching a general teaching load, it takes about 10 years to build up 10,000 hours. So could I just have a show of hands here for a minute? How many people here are teachers or have been teachers at some point in their life? Are teachers or have been teachers? That's nearly everyone. Excellent, okay. And now could you put your hand up if you have more than 10 years in teaching? You have taught for more than 10 years. That's wonderful. That's a significant proportion of people. That's excellent. You see, because teaching, it seems to me, is an odd kind of profession. And it is my profession, although I don't kind of think of it as a profession, because if it is a profession, it's the craziest profession. Because it's a profession where the better at it you get, the less likely you are to do it. For most people. I mean, I've worked in lots and lots of schools, over 200 schools worldwide I've worked in. And I know so many principals and deputy principals who are excellent teachers who never teach anymore. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people here who have made teaching their vocation. And I think that's what teaching really is. I think it's a vocation rather than a profession. Because if it is a profession, it's the only profession in the world that I can think of that's got a salary cap. You know, in almost any other profession, there is always a pathway that you can keep on increasing and increasing and increasing the returns, the benefits from your job. But teaching seems to have a salary cap. And it's a weird thing, isn't it? You know, if we could solve that, there's debates going on all around the world right now in the United States about how do we measure teaching effectiveness. Well, if you could solve the problem of teaching being an occupation where if you're ambitious and you want to get ahead and you want to earn more money and you want to achieve more predominance, you have to change jobs and do something else. You have to start administrating, you have to do a lot of other things. If we could change that structure, I think we'd change the whole problem with teaching, if there is a problem. But teaching is what I want to talk about, because I think that teaching is a vocation. I think it's something people do because it feeds their heart. They do it because they can make a difference in the world. Because through their work, they can see change happening. Would you agree? Is that why we teach? And it's interesting to think back. Do you ever think back to the time when you discovered that it was your vocation? Because I want to tell you about a moment when I discovered that teaching was what I wanted to do. And I have my first degree is in food technology, so I was a food technologist and I worked in industry as like an industrial chemist and all sorts of things. And then I ended up teaching food technology at the tertiary level. And then I changed to teaching teachers, so I was a teacher trainer for a number of years. And I was teaching like accelerated learning skills. You know, this was like 20 years ago when accelerated learning was the big deal. And how to sing and dance in front of the class, really. And it came to me eventually that the students were not necessarily benefiting from the skills of learning that were being imparted in the teachings were not necessarily transferring to the students. And so I decided to set up a program for students. So I did that, and I was running a program in a school in a very small town in New Zealand, in Ngarawahia. And a small town, and I was there one morning. The program lasted a whole day, and so I was there in the morning, and this class filed in the morning, this group of students, about 30 students, and one girl in that class stood out to me. And she stood out because she was dirty. She had dirty clothes, she had dirty hair, and there was something very odd about that. But I thought, oh well, see what happens. And so she sat down at the back, and we got started on the course, and the course ran, and she was not participating, she was not really doing much at all, but she was there, and she was facing the front, and she wasn't causing a problem, so we just let it roll. And partway through the course, I got the children to do a visualization exercise, where they all stand up, and they do a certain physical stretch, and then they close their eyes and imagine something, and they repeat the stretch, and they increase their performance. It's a suggestion exercise, shows them how the power of suggestion. But I got all the children standing up and asked them all to close their eyes. And everyone closed their eyes except this girl. And she was at the back, and she was standing there. And I realized, looking in her eyes, she was afraid to close her eyes. She was scared. And so I didn't, usually I'll hassle people to that, but I didn't. I just left her alone, completely alone. So we went through the exercise, and everyone else had their eyes closed, so no one noticed her. So we went through the exercise. And then we went off, after that exercise was finished, we had a break. So I went off on the break, and I went to the staff room, and I was talking to the teachers, and I mentioned this girl, and this woman said, yes. And she identified her straight away, and she told me about her. And this is a terribly sad case. This girl had a history of physical and sexual abuse in her life for many years. And she was in recovery. The situation had changed. She was in recovery, but she was at school, but she was not participating. She was completely blank. She had learnt to be helpless. She would not contribute, she would not smile, she would not do anything, she would turn up, she would go home again. That was it, that was her function. But they were doing everything they could to help her and help her through this, but she was not contributing. And this is a terrible situation. But I was really well read at that time because I'd read all this stuff, and I'd read all Martin Seligman's work on learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. And I was familiar with Julian Rotter's work on locus of control, an internal locus of control, an external locus of control. I'd read attribution retraining, Heider and Wiener, on how you can change mindsets, change states of mind. But probably most importantly, I'd read Carol Dweck. Are you familiar with Carol Dweck? These days, all her work is called mindset. People tend to have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, but that's very recent work. This is in the early 90s. This is a long time ago. And so her work then was all about ability versus effort. and how that affects performance. Basically, the idea being that if you attribute failure in performance to ability, I don't have that ability, then that suggests that it is not something you have any control over. It's not something you can really do anything about. So if you think that your lack of performance is due to a lack of ability, you're not likely to do anything about it to change it. But if you think your lack of performance is due to a lack of strategy or effort, the way you're doing it or the amount of energy you put into it, then those are things you have some control over. So you're likely to do something in order to make a change. And it all comes down to what you attribute as the cause of your performance deficit, so to speak. Now, what I'd done is I'd created this exercise, you see, and I'd created this exercise which was a juggling exercise. And I'd created this exercise as an attribution retraining exercise. In other words, what you do is you put children in a situation where they're faced with learning something that looks difficult. And of course, when they're looking at something that looks difficult, they straight away tell all sorts of stories to themselves about how difficult it's going to be and everything. And then you get into the process of teaching them to notice what's going on inside their head and notice how to make a change. And then, if they make that change, are they then able to do the exercise? And this was the thing, you see. So my little thing that I had was what happens when children are faced with a difficulty learning anything is, of course, they tend to get stuck in their can'ts, don't they? Now, if you think about when you say I can't juggle, what you're doing is you're making an ability attribution. You're saying I can't do it. In other words, it is not in my body. It is not physically possible for me to do this thing. I do not have the ability. Now, the problem people strike is they say there's no such thing as can't, just make it an I can. The problem with I can is that you are again making an ability attribution. And you're saying that you can do something that you know intrinsically, well, you think you don't have the ability for. So that doesn't work very well. So what I was doing was I was trying to get the students to change from an ability attribution for failure, I can't do it, to an effort attribution for failure. I haven't yet. Because if you haven't yet learned to juggle, well, you haven't yet learned to juggle. It's just a fact. But notice if you say, I haven't yet, you are attributing your lack of success to just a suggestion that maybe if you were taught how to, or maybe if you learnt the right strategy, or maybe if you put in some more effort, maybe you could. It's possible that you might, because it's just something you haven't done yet. Now, it's such a simple thing, isn't it? So absolutely simple. But it's incredibly powerful. This girl stands there. So we're in this juggling exercise. She's got 3 balls. And we start with 1 ball, and she gets 1 ball, and she goes, yep, no problem at all. She can do 1 ball, no problem at all. So then we get to 2 balls. Everyone gets to 2 balls, and throw, catch, catch. Throw, catch, no problem at all. No problem at all. We get to 3 balls, and she goes, I can't. And I say to her, is that a can't or is it just a haven't yet? Is it just a haven't yet? And she goes, no, it's a can't. And she will not engage at all. And she will not engage at all. She will not even try. But of course, I'm really, really persistent. And in the nicest possible way. I'm saying, think about it. Is it maybe possible that it's just something you haven't done yet? And we go on and on and on. So eventually, just to get rid of me, she says, all right, I haven't yet. And she does. And she smiled. And the whole world changed. In that moment, the whole world changed. Her world changed because she learned. In that moment, well, I like to believe she learned that she could have some control. That she did not have to be helpless. That control was inside of her. By making a change in her mental state, she was actually able to make a demonstrable change in performance. She was actually able to see that she could improve by changing something inside her head. And that was such a huge moment. And everything about her changed. She stood differently. Everything changed. And for the rest of that day, she participated. She joined in. She did everything that was required of her. She made a change. But you see, the world didn't just change for her. It changed for me as well. Because in that moment I learnt lots of things. I learnt that a teacher can make a huge difference in a child's life. I learnt that attribution, the way in which we think, makes a huge difference to performance. I also learnt that you can teach what these days we call affective skills. You can teach children about how thinking affects performance. And this then became my mission. So you put together some attribution retraining exercises with some organisational exercises, some time management exercises, and some information organising exercises, and all these different things, and you've got a package of skills that I call learning skills. And that was the moment when I discovered that the power of a teacher. And so 17 years and 150,000 students later, I'm still doing exactly the same thing. So what I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to turn to your neighbour, and I'd like you to just talk about for a minute, if you don't mind, any moment in your life where you either had that profound moment when you discovered that you could make a change in someone's life, or a teaching moment when you noticed you'd made a change to what someone was doing, or a moment when you were teaching or doing something and it made a change for you, that there was a profound change that said to you, it's teaching that makes the difference. Can you share that with the person sitting next to you, just for a moment? Okay, if I could have your attention again. This whole attribution thing I find fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. You see, what I've got underneath that desk there, you can't see, is a big bag that I brought all the way from New Zealand. It's packed to the top with juggling balls. And what I thought I might do right now is I might take the next 10 minutes and I might teach you all how to juggle. You see, the thing is, what's going through your head right now? See, that's the whole point. You see, within this room, there's probably someone who's saying to themselves, oh, yes, that'd be wonderful. I'd love to do that. I've always wanted to learn to juggle. And there's probably someone else who's saying, oh, yeah, might be all right. Might be better than sitting here. And there's always someone else who's saying, oh no, not me, not going to get me up there. And there's someone else who's saying, absolutely not, I can't do that, the man's mad. I could never do that. Now the thing is, you've got to realise that's just you talking to yourself. That's all it is. But the way in which you talk to yourself actually sets you up. And it actually sets you up to try, to have another go, to persist, to persevere, or to not. And I don't have a bag of balls. I'm sorry, I'm not going to teach you how to juggle. I'm sorry. Well, you see, the thing is with teenagers, I've probably taught 50, 60,000 teenagers how to juggle. With teenagers, it takes about 15 minutes. With adults, it takes a little longer, usually. But really what I want to talk about is teaching, and I want to ask you what the point is of teaching. Or more, what is the point of school-based education? You know, what are we aiming to do? What is the kind of thing, like if you could come up with a phrase, what are we aiming to achieve by the time children finish school? What are we aiming to achieve? Could you just have a chat about that or just shout something out? Whoops. Have a think about that. Anyone like to make a comment? What are we trying to achieve? What is the, I've written it down here, something like, what is the ultimate aim of school-based education? Lifelong learning. Is that what you were going to say, Stan?
Oh, no, I was thinking of transfer.
Okay. To do that, would you have to be a lifelong learner? Would you all agree? Is that what we're after? Is that the point of it? Yep.
I would say teaching them how to make the right decision.
Teaching them how to make the right decisions?
I would say that our philosophical aim is to get there, but whether we actually achieve it with the current
Yeah, I didn't ask what are we achieving. Good point. But what are we aiming for? So you'd agree that that's the aim?
Maybe to prepare you to pursue your purpose in life.
Okay.
Academically, or intellectually, or culturally.
To achieve your purpose in life? Would a part of that be the necessity to be able to learn by yourself independently without a teacher?
Definitely.
Okay.
I was going to say be competent, whether it takes one try or many tries.
Okay. But generally, it sounds like there's a bit of a consensus that those words, lifelong learn, they might not be exactly right words. Those seem to be something that we're aiming for. Is that right? And you could call it lots of things, couldn't you? We call it self-directed learning, self-managed learning, autonomous learning, independent learning, self-regulated learning, lifelong learning. Those have been buzzwords in education forever. And how well are we doing, do you think? You see, I've been teaching forever, as I was saying. I'm really, really old, all that stuff. And I've seen changes happening in education that I think are going in the exact opposite direction. I think in New Zealand and in other countries I work in, we are travelling down the standards-based route. And we're doing the tick-the-box education, and we're doing the teach-to-the-test education. It's got so bad that I've seen teachers walk into a class and say to a class, right, at the end of the year there's going to be an exam question on this. And you're going to have two options, and you're going to have to do this or this. So we're going to drill this, we're going to teach this, and I'm going to teach you how to pass that question. So they're actually teaching two specific questions that they know are going to turn up in the end-of-year exam. And I don't think that's anything about lifelong learning at all. It's about, it's about pragmatic learning, I guess. It's about doing as little as possible in order to achieve the grade. It's about tick-the-box education. So I don't think that necessarily we're heading down that track. Mind you, it seems to me in the IB, maybe we are. And you see, the work that I've been doing with the IB has been, I was working with the IBCC originally, and then I've been working with Malcolm Nicholson from The Hague on the ATL component of the MYP, the approaches to learning component of the MYP, the new MYP, and how the approaches to learning, the skills of good learning, are going to take a much greater predominance in the new MYP. And it seems to me that this opens up an opportunity, a possibility. And that possibility, I think, could be a revolution in teaching. You know, I get to work with in my job in lots of schools with a venerable history. You know, there's one, I guess, not so far from here in Bermuda. Now, in Bermuda, there's a school there called Warwick Academy that I go to once a year, and that school was opened in 1642. So it's been there for 340 years, 370 years. I also get to work in a school in London called Harrow School. And Harrow School was founded in, I don't recall this one, 1572. 1572. It's been there for 440 years. And there's evidence of a school, not necessarily Harrow School, being in that exact site since 1243, 769 years. And my point is that if you were able to time travel and you were able to go back 750 years to the Harrow site, or you were able to go back 360 years to the Warwick Academy site, do you think you'd recognise a classroom? Of course you would. Because there would be one teacher standing in front of a class, controlling their learning by acting as the font of all knowledge. By teaching. This is what we call teaching. Is I know all the stuff that you need to know and I'm going to give it to you slowly and piecemeal and at my pace. And this is what we call teaching. Now I think the new MYP and I think the skills focus opens up a revolution in teaching. And it's not just the fact that there is ATL skills, it's also the fact that there is so much internet-based school material out there now. And it's also the fact that good internet, broadband, high-speed broadband connections exist now. And it's also the fact that most people, how many people in this room have got some internet-capable device in their pocket, in their hand, or on their lap? The proliferation of devices that can access the internet. You put all those things together, and you've got what I'm calling a revolution in teaching. And I think it's a revolution that is possibly the first revolution in teaching for at least 500 years anyway, maybe 700 years. Because 500 years ago, the Gutenberg press was developed, when we started printing material, we started printing textbooks, it took 10 years and there were 20 million books across Europe when they from the first press, believe it or not. And I think it's going to be the first revolution since then, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'm talking about the possibilities that exist through the new focus in ATL. And what I'm talking about is a revolution. Gee, that's slow, isn't it? It was supposed to go. So there's the revolution. Now, I call it the Pospagil Revolution. Isn't that a terrible acronym? I love it. It stands for Process-Oriented Skills-Based Guided Inquiry Learning. Now, I don't do neat and tidy acronyms, I'm afraid. I think that neat and tidy acronyms, they just don't work, you see, because nature isn't neat and tidy. You know, you've got the 4 C's of this, and you've got the 4 D's of that, and you've got the 3 G's of that. Nature doesn't work like that. Nature's messy, so my acronyms are always messy. Sorry about this. But so you have to actually understand it to remember it. Although as a workshop I was doing just a couple of weeks ago, a guy said to me, you know, your acronyms, they're impossible to remember, thus making it memorable. But so process-oriented skills-based guided inquiry learning. Or if you want to put it the other side of it, process-oriented skills-based guided inquiry teaching, POSPA-GIT. And the aim of the whole exercise is to develop self-regulated learners. Check, it even goes so far as putting DSRL, Dizeral Pospagil. You know, developing self-regulated learners through process-oriented skills-based guided inquiry learning. How's the translation going? It's all right. It's possible in another language that might actually make a word that's easier to remember, you know, who knows. So this is what I want to talk a little bit about today. Now, this is my website. This is the address of my website. And on my website at this address are all the slides I'm putting up here today. So there's quite a few slides from now on. So they're all on that website if you want to find them. They're in a PDF file, so you get the whole lot. So, and if I get past this and you forget what it is, it's also on this piece of paper I'm going to give you in just a second, which I'll do right now. I've got a handout for you, it's an article I wrote called The Teaching Revolution. So it's not exactly the script for today, but it contains all the material I'm going to be talking about today is in this particular article, okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're welcome to take an extra one if you want, no problem. Anyone on this side of the room hasn't got one? Oh, there's one coming to you. Yeah, thank you. Anyone not got one? I wouldn't suggest you read it now, but just be assured that everything that I'm going to talk about is in here and the slides are up on my website. All good? Okay. But of course, being teachers, the first thing you'll do is read the whole thing. But that's okay. That's okay. Because I'm going to distract you by giving you something else to look at. So, what is teaching? This is my first question. And I've got a couple of quotes that I really like about teaching. And I think the first quote is from Jerome Brunner, who says, "Teaching is the canny art of intellectual temptation."